Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series, where I interview top practitioners in the CVC world and learn with you the best practices and golden nuggets that they have accumulated over their careers. This week, you will be hearing a conversation I had with Steven Kaplan, professor at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Steven, could you take a few minutes to share your story and how you got to where you are today?
Thank you. Great to be here. So it's been a long road. And I would say corporate venturing and venture in general. I've been a finance professor at the University of Chicago at the Booth School of Business since 1988. And I started there and I taught corporate finance. And I had done my doctoral dissertation was about leverage buyouts. So I knew something about private equity. I really knew nothing about venture capital and startups. And I got tenure in 1995. And then in about that time, the person who was teaching entrepreneurial finance at Booth, Paul Gompers, decided to go back to Harvard Business School. So the dean said, I can find other people to teach corporate finance. It's hard to find someone who can teach venture capital and private equity. Will you do it? And so I said, okay. I'd been teaching the same thing for a while. And so I started teaching private equity and venture. It was half buyouts, half venture in 1996. And then, though I started teaching it, one of my students came to me and said, these other schools are starting to have business plan competitions. Could we have one? And I said, okay. And I said, you do the work, I'll find you some judges and some money. And so we did our business plan competition I think the first one was in the spring of 97. And then the dean said, oh, now you're really doing entrepreneurship and we need to have an entrepreneurship program. Yeah, I'm putting you in charge of entrepreneurship. So thank you very much. And that's how I got into it.
And we're going to talk about what became of that business plan competition because this is truly remarkable. But let's not be humble when you say you knew about private equity. I think there was an article from Fortune that described you as probably the foremost private equity scholar in the galaxy. So clearly you knew a lot.
No, that's correct. I've been doing research on it for a long time, and I've written some good research on private equity, venture capital, lots of things.
Very nice. So one thing that we should start with, because you've looked at both private equity and venture capital, is it like a spectrum or is it like some very different asset class, and how we should be thinking about that? How should we think about the two? Because they work together at some point in time. They hand off from one to the other. So how should we think about them?
So they're different. You have this range, right? You have over here, you have startups, over here, you have buyouts. And I think as you get here more mature, it's really you're taking an existing business and trying to figure out how to make it better. And in some sense, it's value investing. In some sense, you can be growing, but you're making something that exists better. And that's how my mind works. That's where I come from. As you get earlier and earlier, it's really about figuring out where the future is going. And so because it doesn't exist, the best startups are like something new, and being able to say, okay, the world is going there, that way this is going to work, it's a different, I think, mindset and skill set.
Okay, so let me double click on that. If you have a student that comes to you and asks, should I go in private equity? Should I go in venture capital? Should I work in startups? What are maybe the one or two questions you're going to ask to know very quickly which one they should lean on?
Okay, it's tricky. So first of all, should you do a startup? Are you going to come up with something new? And again, the startups I care about are the high octane startups. Some people have the mindset to do that. They want to go out and try things, break things, the Elon Musks or Steve Jobs of this world. And other people are more, that's not what they do, that's not their mindset. So then you can go work for a startup that someone else has started, right? So that's that. Because you have the idea and you have the vision, then you need to execute. And so I think execution is constant across everything, in that once you have a good idea, good business, you need a good jockey, right? You need someone to drive it and help get there. So you could be someone who wants to do that, and I think go across the spectrum. I think starting something and also investing in something, it's a somewhat different mindset. And then on the private equity side, again, that's where you're looking for opportunities where there's a business that you can make better somehow. So some people are buying family-owned businesses that are private and professionalizing them, maybe bringing in sales, bringing that they haven't had, bringing in systems they haven't had. Other people will take a business that's a little bigger and is maybe doesn't have the right strategy, doesn't know how to use technology. And obviously, startups, you got to grow or you lose money. And the mature companies, you don't make money, you do a buyout, you don't make money by cutting everything. You make money by getting it efficient, but then growing it, because people aren't paying for something that's dying, they're paying for something that's growing.
It's funny when you say you make money by growing, but some people would argue that with some startups have negative unit economics like Uber used to have, and so the more money you make, the more money you lose as well. And so there is a time of reckoning.
No, at some point you have to make money, and that's what people, the DSTs and Tigers, saw, that the Facebooks of this world had positive gross margins and would grow into their valuation. So I think there's got to be some sense of positive economics, but to grow, you can spend money for quite a long time. And then, of course, there's always the risk you won't get that money. So always a trade-off.
So, Steve, you just mentioned earlier value investing, and I think maybe it's intuitive what it is, but do you mind explaining what is really value investing?
Value investing, I think, in public markets and I guess in private markets, is where you see an asset or a company that's undervalued and you buy it. But the value investing may also include they're doing something to help increase the value. So that would be true in private equity.
Now, I want to go back to something way more fun, the business plan competition. Clearly, that has morphed into something way bigger. But do you mind telling us the story of how it started and how it built momentum over time? Because I think that's something which maybe the audience are thinking about starting something small. And I think it's quite inspiring to know about how it might become in the future.
So this is the business plan competition. It's actually called the Ed Kaplan New Venture Challenge, and he was the founder of Zebra Technologies, and he's not related to me, unfortunately. So it started, as I said, in '97, and I asked the students, how was it? And they said it was great, but we didn't really have time to work on our plans. They said it would have been much better if it had been a course. So the next year, I started doing it as a course, and I effectively stumbled on the Y Combinator / Techstars model like 10 years before they did. In any event, the way it works is you get students to submit a preliminary business plan in January, and then you take those plans and you only accept the ones that are promising. So it's really important you get rid of the plans that aren't going anywhere.
Yep.
And I meet with all my teams and ask, how can I help you? And so who can I connect you with? And I now have a team where I've got 5 or 6 coaches where they meet with all the teams and plug them into their network. So we had one student, which I'll talk about later, needed a supplier of almond flour. Well, one of the coaches knew a manufacturer who had almond flour. And so we try to maybe introduce them to a potential customer if they're B2B. So what you do then in the course, you have them present, and I bring in 10 or 12 investors or entrepreneurs, and they present. They're really early, like they don't know what they're doing. In their first presentation, they really get beaten up very badly.
Mm.
And it's hugely productive because they realize, oh my God, I have a ton of work to do. And they do that. I'm about to do that in April. And I have 12 teams, and one of my colleagues has another section. He has 12 teams. When I started doing it, we had 12 teams total. Now we have somewhere between 24 and 30 every year. And the teams present in April, they get beaten up, they fix their plans and they redo their plans, they respond to the feedback, they present again in May, and they're like hugely better. It's like unbelievable how much better they are from January when they apply, then they're better in April, and then they're better again in May. And it's in some cases it's just astonishing how much better they get. And then from the 24 plans, we'll put 10 into the finals, which we do end of May, beginning of June. And so the first time we did it, I think we had $25,000 in prize money. And over time, we've gotten better. And we've had the thing that's fantastic is the teams have to have one MBA student on it. So we're sourcing locally. It's not the huge sourcing Y Combinator sources from all over the world. We source just from our MBA students.
Which is
And
a very good sourcing to start.
it's a very good, so it's a very, yeah, it's a high quality group, but it's not the whole world. And then who we had, our teams over the years have raised over $1 billion, and exit values have been over 10 billion. And so we had in 2006, we had Grubhub. In 2007, we had Braintree, which bought Venmo, which got bought by PayPal. And then in 2014, we had this company called Simple Mills, which was gluten free, low sugar baked goods. So her first was Caitlin Smith was the entrepreneur. Her first product was muffin mix, and she became the biggest selling muffin mix on Amazon. And then she went into cookies, crackers, all sorts of other baked goods. And she just sold her company last month for $795 million. So that's our third exit over $750 million. And it's huge fun. We got a couple of others running around that are doing pretty well. And so that's my experience. So I started doing this really in the .com era, right? 97, 98. And I saw mobile. Now I'm seeing AI, and hopefully I'll see something else.
And so for the audience, that's why I was saying this is quite amazing to think it started with a business plan competition. And now this is a 1 billion invested worth $10 billion with truly amazing startup that came out of it. So I just find it inspiring.
Good. It's great. It is. It's unbelievable. It's huge fun. And that's sort of the nice thing about it. You get these great students and you can really help them. And actually the older you get, the more you can help them because you have a better network. So it's huge fun because you're seeing new stuff, and it's across. We're not focused. So we have food, and we had one of our winners a couple of years ago, like builds equipment for space. So it's all over the place. It's huge fun, and you can really help the students, and they're terrific.
I think there is a golden nugget as well, which is because a business plan has to be written up front, it's very applied, which means that when they go through the course, they can probably relate, oh, this is what I didn't do here. This is what I should add there. And then, of course, what you said is, I think, the truth for any entrepreneurs pitching to VCs. There's nothing like feedback about what you are so focused on, you might actually miss out some parts which are so important for your business. And so I'm not surprised of the dramatic improvement from that first contact to investors and entrepreneurs to the next one.
No, and we push, I think what they also get pushed on is because there are deadlines, there's a tight time frame. They really work hard. Like some of them, last year's winner, I think they started in January and they were talking to some customers. And this is a logistics business for basically chilled and frozen food logistics, which is a little bit different from logistics, regular logistics, and because of the refrigeration. And when they started, they had the idea, they were talking to customers. By the time they were done, end of May, or not done, but the finals, they had a bunch of companies signed up as betas, and they had coverage of, I think they had 20% of the market covered. And they had geographic coverage of the whole country, and they had a big time. It was like unbelievable, but it was something where there was a real need, and they ended up doing that while they were doing their pitches and building their business. And then they won, and they won about, I want to say, $1 million or so in investment in the competition. And then they raised another million very quickly right thereafter from one of the judges. So they raised $2 million, and now they're off operating, and we'll see how they do.
Well, I think you're making a very compelling case why the Chicago Bulls Entrepreneurs Program is special, because you're talking about not just learning about entrepreneurship, but actually applying it and potentially coming out of it with a startup that's already in full speed. All right, now I think it's time to talk about the jockey, horse, fit. Clearly, there is something about the jockey in this case, but do you mind, for the audience, explaining what is a jockey, what is a horse, the fit, so that we can then deep dive into it?
So the horse is obviously the business, and the jockey is the founder or founders running it. And like I said, I think I've got various research that says you have to have a good business. If you have a good business, you have a chance. And then once you have a good business, you need somebody who is going to execute and grow the business. And that's the jockey or the founder.
Okay. And how can you tell if someone is going to be the right jockey for a very early stage startup?
So that's a good question that a lot of investors ask. And I would say I've actually done a lot of research on CEOs and what makes a good CEO. You can look at a lot of CEO characteristics, but they boil down, there's 4 general factors that executives have, and one is like you call talent, where they do a lot of things well, and you can measure that. And the things would be hiring, firing, being a good listener, treating people with respect. Let's see, what I'm trying to think. And the second factor after talent is execution, where it's persistent, efficient, proactive. And the other side is the interpersonal likability. So the CEOs, it turns out, tend to be more talented. The CEOs tend to be more charismatic. They tend to be more creative, strategic. And I always ask, because this one's harder, are they more execution or are they more interpersonal?
Interesting.
Because a lot of people would say CEOs should be both, right?
Yeah,
But it turns out they skew one way a little bit more than the other. So if you were telling me what I was looking for in a CEO, someone who's creative, strategic, and executes. And so that would, of course, be Steve Jobs, not the nicest guy. That would be Jeff Bezos. That would be Elon Musk. Those are the characteristics. It would also actually, by the way, be Satya Nadella, who is nice, right? So you can be nice. You don't have to be a jerk, but creative, strategic, and execute. And Satya does that very well. I'll tell you something though that's interesting. In one of the papers I just wrote, which again, it speaks to the business mattering, and it speaks to, I'm not sure about it speaks less about what the traits are, but I got this data set of all the deals that a seed investor in the Midwest looked at over like a 6-year period. Okay. And so, it was like thousands. And of those thousands, he ended up looking carefully at 300 or 400. And then of those 300 or 400, he invested in 80 or 90. And so the 400 that he looked at, he rated the management team, the product and the market of the business. And so the first thing I did was said the ones that he saw but didn't look at hard, how did they do versus the ones he looked at, didn't invest in versus the ones he looked at and invested in. And the good news was it was like that. These did the best, these did second best, these did the worst. So there's some selection ability even very early. Then I looked at, and these things haven't exited, so this is preliminary, but you could look at, did they raise $1 million? Did they raise 10 million? Did they raise 25? And the best predictor of raising $1 million or more was the management team.
Okay.
But then the predictor of raising 10 million or more was the business. So this goes to the thing that the early stage stuff, get the business right, that a really good founder can't fix a bad business, that the business mattered more. But I can't tell you in that sample with the ones who succeeded, was it charisma or execution or what?
But let me ask you about the business model. Is it about the size of the market potential, or is it more than that?
It was the product. It wasn't, the market was a separate thing. So the market was predicted some of the stuff, but it was the product and whether they thought it was a good business.
So the value capture mechanism.
Yeah.
Actually, I might suggest a study because I looked and I couldn't find evidence that when the market cools or when there is a downside, there's no evidence that the VCs and CVCs are acting that different.
Oh, different, because the VCs are not. Yeah, that's a good point. That's very interesting. I don't know.
Yeah.
That would be actually, it's good. I don't know if anyone's done that. That's good. It's a good thing. Okay, good.
From studying some of the facts and looking at the data, and I co-published with 6 pages some reports trying to point out. Actually,
send them to me when we're sending me later.
Because I think corporate VC get a bad rep for leaving when things go bad, but actually that's the same for VCs. It's just that the expectation is CVC will do it, but VCs do it too, and then they come back. So yeah, I would share that with you afterwards.
That's very interesting. Okay, very interesting.
I'm going to share something which I haven't shared on this podcast, but I think the healthcare CVCs are different from any other CVCs. And why they are different is that their mothership think exactly like venture capital. They also understand that you de-risk over time and you increase your investments over time as a probability of success increase, which is so different from any other type of companies outside healthcare. Or most companies tries to invest in a distribution law type of outcome. But if I think about healthcare and new medicine, it's the same. It's a power law type of outcome. And I find that the CVCs from healthcare really have better support from their mothership because they already understand power law type of outcome.
Oh, very interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah. Now, I know you're an expert in corporate governance, and I want to ask you about how does early stage startups should start thinking about corporate governance, not in a way that kills them early, but prepares them well for when they start to mature and start to get more late stage investors? Or would you say they should not worry about it at all?
No, I think some of the things that went off the rails didn't have any governance. So FTX, apparently didn't have that. And wasn't clear it had it either. So when things go wrong, that's a good structure to have for an investor. And I think even for the entrepreneur, although the entrepreneurs, some of them don't want to give up any control. And so that's a little bit of a tension. And I think as the entrepreneur, what do you want to see? You should be thinking, really, once you take venture money, who do you want on your board? And who's going to be somebody who A, supports you, but B, I think pushes you a little. You don't want to, I've seen board members where the CEO is going a bit off the rails and the director is afraid to push back. And those can end up very badly. It benefits everybody if the director can can push back, and then the entrepreneur listens. And so that's the advice I would give if you're an entrepreneur building a
Yep.
board, is put people on who are going to challenge you,
Yep.
and also don't have too thin a skin. Like, take the feedback, listen, and if you have good directors, that turns into a virtuous cycle as opposed to a negative one. You get a bad director, then it's bad.
True. I think that I've seen board members which I would qualify as cheerleaders. They always
Mhm.
cheer for you, but they never push back. I think that when I'm thinking of FTX and WeWork, I don't know if it's FOMO, fear of missing out, or if it's people who are falling in love too much with wanting too much to invest, and they compromise on that contract, which has been working so well for venture capital for so long. And so I feel like this is nearly more on the emotional front that people make mistakes, not on the rational side. So maybe I'm going to ask a spicy question, but I was in Paris last week for Hello Tomorrow. And clearly, Europe doesn't have necessarily that compensation mindset of equity for upsides. Do you think that's a necessary condition for startups to do really well? Or do you think there's a European model where it's not that necessary? And this is spicy on purpose. So feel free to say this is not
No,
something.
I have this line, if you pay peanuts, you'll get monkeys. And so I think that's true in the US. I think that's true in Europe. I think that's a big disadvantage Europe has for public companies. They don't pay their public company execs a lot, and they've been jumping to the US. And they also go to private equity. It's great for the private equity investors who do pay for performance. And I think on the venture side, you have to do that, because people who are the super talented people you want, for the most part, want to get compensated. And even if they don't, if I have a choice, gee, I can do it here and not get compensated, or I can do it here and do the same thing and get compensated, that's where they're going to go.
I think it's amazing. Steve, thank you for your time and your insights. It was really good.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure. And